Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into the science of empathy. Now, we all tend to think of empathy as this amazing human trait, right? The very foundation of all that's good. But what if I told you that our empathy is, well, it's biased, it's selective, and honestly, it can be a really flawed guide for making moral choices. So, let's get into it.
So, to kick things off, let's look at this quote from the psychologist Paul Slovic. He says, "If I look at the mass, I will never act." And wow, that really hits the nail on the head, doesn't it? It gets right to the heart of this paradox we're talking about today. Our ability to feel for others, it doesn't scale up. We can feel so much for one person, but the suffering of thousands, our brains just can't seem to process it in the same way. And you see this play out in the real world all the time. This story of just one person, one single child in need, it can unleash this incredible wave of compassion. But then you hear statistics, thousands, millions of victims. And what happens? It's like our brains just short-circuit. There's actually a name for this. It's called psychic numbing. It's this weird inability to emotionally connect with huge abstract numbers.
I mean, think about the Syrian refugee crisis. This was a perfect and tragic example. For years, right, we were hearing the numbers, hundreds of thousands of deaths. And it was awful, but abstract. And then that one photograph appeared, that single heartbreaking image. And just like that, everything changed. Suddenly the world was paying attention, donations poured in. One real, identifiable person had more power than all those faceless statistics combined.
So this really forces us to ask a pretty uncomfortable question, doesn't it? If our empathy is so selective, if it can be so easily swayed by one picture while it ignores a tragedy of millions, can we really trust it? I mean, should we be relying on it to be our moral compass?
Okay, so to even begin to answer that, we have to break down what empathy actually is. Because it's not just one simple feeling, it's really a mix of three different things working together.
All right, so first up is what's called emotional contagion. This is that gut feeling, It's when you're literally feeling with someone. Think of it like catching a yawn, but for emotions. Then there's empathic concern. This is different. It's feeling for someone. This is that sympathy, that compassion that makes you want to help them. And the third piece of the puzzle is perspective taking. This is the brainy part, the ability to actually put yourself in their shoes and understand where they're coming from. Now here's the kicker. These three things are separate, and when they don't line up, well, that's when things get complicated. So why are our brains wired like this? Well, what's fascinating is that these biases we've been talking about, they're not a bug, they're a feature. They were literally hard-coded into us by evolution.
A huge piece of this puzzle is something called kin selection. It's pretty simple, really. Our ancient ancestors who are laser-focused on protecting their own kids and their immediate family, well, they were the ones who successfully passed on their genes. So over thousands of years, evolution literally shaped us to care, a lot, but only about a very small circle of people.
And check this out. This is one of the most powerful triggers. We are just hardwired to melt when we see baby face cues. You know the look, the big head, those huge eyes, the tiny nose. They scream vulnerability, and it flips a switch in our brain that just makes us want to take care of them. And get this instinct is so powerful, it can actually influence things like criminal sentencing. Seriously, studies have shown that people with more baby-faced features sometimes get lighter sentences.
And it's not just about immediate family, right? Our empathy is also fundamentally tribal. For most of our history, survival meant sticking with your group. So evolution baked in this strong preference for our in-group. We developed intense loyalty and empathy for us, while being pretty indifferent, or even hostile, to them, especially when we were all fighting over the same limited resources.
Okay, so that's the evolutionary why. But how does this actually look inside our heads? Let's dive into the neuroscience and see how this in-group bias is wired right into our brains. Now, this might look like a complex brain map, but the core idea is actually super simple. When you see someone you care about get hurt, the parts of your brain that processed your own pain, they light up. Think about that. Your brain isn't just watching from a distance, it's actually simulating their pain. It's like you're feeling a faint echo of what they're going through. But wait a second. If feeling their pain is, painful, why on earth would we choose to help? Because helping flips a totally different switch. The moment we decide to step in and ease their suffering, our brain's reward system kicks in. We get a little hit of dopamine. It feels good to help. It's literally our brain giving us a little treat for being a good person.
But here's where that tribal bias really shows up in the brain scans. When we see someone from our team in pain, our pain circuits fire up. But what happens when we see a rival, like say the fan of a sports team you can't stand, suffer some kind of setback? You guessed it. Sometimes their pain can actually light up our reward circuits. That feeling has a name. It's schadenfreude, and it's a pretty stark reminder of just how deeply wired that us versus them thinking really is.
So, okay, these biases are baked into us. But how does this all play out in the real world, where the stakes are high? What happens when our powerful but very narrow empathy goes head-to-head with big ideas like fairness and justice?
Well, here's that identifiable victim effect again, but in a study. Researchers asked people how much they donate to help children in need. And whether they said it was for 8 kids or for just 1 kid, people offered about the same amount of money. But then, they gave that one child a name and a photo, and donations went through the roof. It's just proof that our empathy latches onto a single story, not the big picture.
And this next experiment is, wow, it's a real dilemma. So people were told about a sick girl named Sherry Summers. She's on a waiting list for a life-saving treatment, but there are other kids ahead of her who are even sicker. When you just ask people what's fair, most say, well, she has to wait her turn. But then they did something different. They asked another group to first just take a moment and imagine how Sherry must feel. And that one little act of empathy completely changed the outcome. Most of them decided to bump her to the front of the line, completely ignoring the principle of fairness.
So this all sounds pretty bad, right? Our empathy is biased, it's bad at math, it plays favorites. Does that mean we should just ditch it? No, absolutely not. It just means empathy can't fly solo. It needs a co-pilot. And that co-pilot is reason.
Here's really the bottom line. Think of empathy as the engine. It's the powerful emotional fire that gets us moving, that makes us want to care in the first place. Without it, we're just stalled on the side of the road. But that engine needs a steering wheel. And that's where reason and our moral principles come in. They have to direct all that power, making sure we end up somewhere that's actually fair and just for everyone.
A really powerful and tragic example of this comes from the Vietnam War, the My Lai massacre. The soldiers who took part in it, they felt no empathy for the civilians. They saw them as the enemy. But a few soldiers refused to follow orders. And what stopped them? It wasn't a sudden rush of empathy. It was a cold, hard, abstract moral principle. You do not kill unarmed civilians. Period. Their reason stepped in when their empathy failed.
And so that leaves us with the big challenge for all of us. We're all walking around with this incredibly powerful, but also deeply flawed emotional system. Understanding its bugs and biases, that's step one. But the real question, the one we all have to grapple with, is this. How do we take the amazing motivational power of empathy and guide it with reason? How do we use it to build a world that's fair and compassionate for everyone, and not just the people who happen to be in our own little tribe?